CoachC, the CoachC podcast. You might be listening to the CoachC Reboot, Revitalize, and Reinvent podcast right now. And we're here with Kara Goldin, who is the CEO of Hint Water. And we've just been chatting like girlfriends. And I'm going to give a little bit of a quick backstory on how we met. Kara and I are both redheads, as you can see if you're watching this on YouTube on our channel, but we're both redheads, and we met through a mutual friend who called us up and said, we're doing this off-Broadway musical called Red, and we want you to participate. And Randy Zuckerberg invited us. We had brunch with Randy, our late great, my ex-business partner, the late great Stephen Coggins. Our husbands were there, the kids were there, and that's how we met, is really in New York City over brunch and really sharing and swapping stories on what was it like to grow up as a redhead. And it wasn't the way it is now, by the way. When we were growing up as redheads, especially as redheaded women, you know, there was something different about you. You know, they used to burn redheaded women at the stake. So I grew up in an era where that wasn't cool. So that was our first meeting, was really co-producing this off-Broadway musical, which has nothing to do with either of our core businesses, other than we're entrepreneurs and we're investors. And I remember meeting you at lunch going, wow, this woman is a force to be reckoned with. And that was kind of the foreshadowing of the title of your book, which I just finished and couldn't put down. The title of the book is Undaunted. And I shared this with you because this is such a brilliant read. Pick it up. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're looking at what's next for you, this is incredible. It's a really reinventive story on, you know, what's next and taking something on. And when we were talking, we were literally talking about, you know, having babies and figuring it out, and you're stocking the shelves and you're doing that. But let's backtrack a little bit, your journey. And why did you actually want to share the story and about Undaunted and about becoming the CEO of Hint? What was important for you about that? Tell me a little bit more.
So I felt that well, thank you, first of all, for that really nice introduction, and so fun how we did meet.
I love Hint Water. It's one of my favorites.
So over the last 4 years of not only traveling to build my company, but also doing a ton of public speaking, I felt like there were all these questions that I would get from people in the audience who not only how I built it, but how I managed different things along the way, and how they had this perception that as an entrepreneur, I was super successful. I was a risk taker. I never had any failures. It was just poof, you know, just made it happen.
So easy.
It was so easy, right? And that's when I really took a moment and started journaling about some of these thoughts that I had. And initially I wasn't even talking about them. And then I thought, gosh, it's almost therapeutic for me to talk about some of the stories that I had been through. And some people who had been around me, I would share stories, but there's even stories in there where people, investors of ours from the early days, like John Legend, didn't even know and were, you know, laughing. And they're fun to laugh later on. When you're in them, you know, maybe you're not laughing and it's a huge challenge. But I felt that by getting these things off my chest, not only would I be able to answer some of these questions, I would almost prompt myself to do this, but also I started thinking about a year and a half ago that maybe I should publish these stories because they could really help a lot of people, and maybe people who weren't able to hear me and weren't sitting in the audiences. So that's when a friend who's an author said, you should turn this into a book. So the hardest thing about that, once I got a publisher, was that it was 600 pages of a journal, and I had to turn it into 200 and change because people don't want to read a 600-page book, right? Most people don't. And so that was really the toughest thing, was boiling the stories down and you know, deleting a bunch of them, or I should say putting them to the side for now. I easily have another book talking about a lot of other stories, but I felt just like I did when I decided to start Hint, that if I could actually help people, in this case, get through walls or challenges that as an entrepreneur, or really just start, know that, you know, there's no right way, there's no, you know, easy path. And, you know, if you have 4 kids and you've put walls in front of yourself to say, I can't start a company. Well, guess what? You can. Might take you longer. You
Right.
might, have challenges along the way and all of these things, but don't count yourself out. And that is really the message that I'm hoping for people to have. And I call it undaunted and living undaunted. And I'm hopeful that it will frankly just spark moments in people to know that entrepreneurs are not necessarily risk takers. They're creative and they know how to, successful ones know how to execute. But even in some cases, timing, maybe a pandemic or other things will come along that you're not able to control. And more than anything, weathering a storm and really learning along the way allows you to, if it isn't during this time, maybe do it the next time better.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to unravel a few of the layers in there. There were so many synergies when I started reading the book because I also have 3 kids and I had the emergency C-sections, the whole thing's going along with that. I noticed that before the children, though, there was a theme for you that was you were exceptionally driven. And, and that's, but there's, a lot of people but you're unapologetically driven.
Mhm.
And I love that. And I love it because I think that you give other entrepreneurs and other women the room to be unapologetically driven in a way that, you can be a force to be reckoned with without leaving bodies in the past.
Mhm.
You can create authentic relationships with people without annihilating them. And I really, in your story and in listening to you and knowing about you, that's what comes across is that authenticity and who you are from your brand and your commitment. So let's backtrack a little bit. When you took on, you've had AOL, you've had this history of really high level corporate jobs, you've taken a lot of risk in your career, and then you became a mom, which so many people transitioning and have become a parent know that in and of itself, it's crazy, right? So
Mhm.
tell me, I did the same thing, cutting up the fruit. The kids were born, they were little. I was getting on my eldest now says, mommy used to take the airplane to work and daddy took the subway. And so that was the way it
Yeah.
was. I would be cutting up the fruit in the water. And, a lot of the moms, there was 9 babies born on our street at the time. And
Wow.
the moms were like, we're making our own baby food. We're cutting the fruit up to drink more water because it's healthy for us and doing all of those things. And we really started, but that's your story. How kind of you needed to drink more water to become healthier because it was something that really wanted to do. But tell us more about that shift. As a parent, as a mom, you're in your kitchen. Because I think so many people right now are in their kitchen. Their kids are at home. They're doing all these crazy things and they can really relate to you had this idea.
Yeah, and I not only had, I mean, it's interesting because it all sort of meshes together. I definitely had this idea while my kids were young and I was trying to get them to drink more water because I just thought every time they were amped up on juice that they just were crazy, right? And so I was conscious of that and sort of made that connection. But I was also realizing that I was not as healthy as I wanted to be. And so that was something that I had been carrying with me for a while, not really sure how to solve it. And so while I was taking some time off from AOL, I had resigned after 7 years and primarily because I was traveling too much and I had these young kids and I was pregnant with my third when I decided to uh to retire from AOL. And I'm living in San Francisco and I decided, okay, I'm going to look for that next tech job. That's what I had been doing. There's tons of tech opportunities. But I was trying to lose this baby weight that I had gained over the course of many years. And also my skin had developed terrible adult acne that I couldn't figure out. And my energy levels had just
Yeah.
sunk. And so I was reading labels, I was counting calories, I was trying all these different diets, and nothing was working. And I'd pretty much given up at this point. And that's when I looked down at my Diet Coke and had kind of this epiphany that, gosh, I've been looking at all of these ingredients in food, but I'm not looking at what I'm drinking.
Right.
And I had been drinking Diet Coke since I was a teenager. And I didn't know this until actually I was reading the book, because I always knew I had been drinking it since I was a teenager, but I didn't recall that it had come out when I was a teenager. And my mom was a big tab drinker. And of
Mine
course, you're
too.
not going to drink. Yeah, I wasn't going to drink my mom's drink. Right. And so Diet Coke came out and I thought it was healthy. I was always kind of trained to think that it was healthier than full sugar soda. And I never questioned it. And I think that's when I thought, gosh, I'm telling my kids to drink more water. Maybe I should be drinking more water too. But also, I don't like all of these ingredients in this drink. So just as a quick test, I really didn't even think it was going to work. I decided to swap out my drink and start drinking water and see what would happen. And people always ask me, did you go down to 1 or 2? Nope. I went cold turkey. I thought, I don't want to miss it. I just want it to be done. And I may go back to it in a couple of weeks, but in 2.5 weeks, I lost 24 pounds.
In 2.5 weeks.
In 2.5 weeks, it was crazy. My skin totally cleared up and my energy levels changed dramatically. And that's when I had this epiphany about, and was kind of angry. I thought I was mad at how, it was a tough 2.5 weeks, but it was 2.5 weeks. It wasn't months. Right. And I had figured this thing out about the fact that my body had just been under so much stress, and that I was not only from this additional weight, but also that I was just every single day it was producing this insulin that would, and again, like I started to really question this because I thought, it's diet. How can that be? And so I was really early in kind of this whole mission that I've now become known for around diet sweeteners, including with friends and family that say, wait, how did this happen? It can't be the diet soda. I was continuing to drink water through this process and wasn't changing anything about what I was eating. And then I got really bored with drinking water and realized that that was the main reason why I didn't continue drinking water even when I was younger, because it was boring. So I started slicing up fruit, throwing it in the water, and then looking for this product on the shelf. And so people always ask me, did you always know you were going to be an entrepreneur? I had worked for very entrepreneurial companies, as you mentioned, AOL, and before that, a little startup that was a spin out of Apple, and Steve Jobs' idea. And then before that, CNN. But I had never really thought of myself as, okay, I'm going to go train there, and then I'm going to go. I also didn't hate my boss, and that's why I wanted to go work for myself. That's the story of a lot of entrepreneurs. That wasn't mine. Mine was really around solving this problem, and I saw this hole in the market.
I love that you're talking about the switch and the transition from being kind of with startups and in the tech industry, because a lot of people who are probably watching this and listening to this, and it's fairly similar to my own story. I was actually a diabetes care representative in the pharmaceutical industry. That was my first career. So understanding the insulin, and on top of that, my stepfather had launched a product called Equal, which is the sweetener.
Oh,
That was his
of
product, right?
course.
And my mom switched everything from sugar to Equal, and everybody's drinking copious amounts. From the time that I was quite young, I started suffering from massive migraine headaches, and they found I'm actually allergic to sweeteners. So I didn't have a Diet Coke habit. It was actual Coca-Cola, because I could not, my body wouldn't tolerate the artificial sweeteners that everybody was touting, and they still push on, diabetics and different patients and things like that. So it's a huge market. It's a huge industry.
Huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
And so, but that transition, because I think there's a lot of people right now in this pandemic that are like, what is next for me? And they're trying to figure out and straddle between, making the decision and the leap to go in and start their own thing. And when you decided you weren't going to go back into tech, because I'm sure your family, your friends, all of your community probably expected you to go back into technology at some level. When you made that choice, what was the backlash that you had, if any?
Well, I think that the challenge is that, anytime you're going into kind of a new venture, right? And I think this could touch on another point, which is one that I felt when I left AOL. I was saying things like, I'm bored, I've been here too long, I, you know, it's time for me to leave or do something else. I didn't know what that was. And I believe that so often people get to a point, and I think the higher level you get within an organization, you, and maybe you get older as well, but you lose the ability to think that you have to learn, right? Instead, you're managing people, you're mentoring, and that's all great. But in addition, that you're so often not putting yourself into positions where you're actually learning. And so when I stumbled upon this problem that I had an idea for, that was probably what was so exciting to me, that I was just every single day getting energized by this idea. Okay, I don't really understand how to get a distributor, and it scared me, and I would complain about it to my husband and my small kids. But then I would just think, okay, how would I find that? Okay, I'm going to go and make a few phone calls. I'm going to start to dig in and research, and I'm going to go to Whole Foods. My favorite, that everybody laughs about as well, as I couldn't figure things out, and so then I would immerse myself in it, and I would literally sit there in Whole Foods, and if I saw somebody that looked like they weren't a consumer but were actually stocking shelves or something, I'd tap them on the shoulder and I'd start asking questions. And I think because I didn't have the experience and I had no idea what I was doing, and I asked fairly intelligent questions, but almost questions as a consumer, I was just so energized by that. And I would feel like I would have, maybe I kind of had these failures along the way too, where people wouldn't speak to me because they thought I was some crazy redhead that was tapping them on the shoulder and asking questions. But then sometimes people would actually give me directions, and I felt like I was making progress. But when you share these stories, when you're in it with your family who loves you, right, and is thinking, oh my gosh, Kara's got 4 children and she's going into the beverage industry, and she's created this water that, she's having a hard time, getting it into stores. I realized that I had a hard time getting it into stores because I was developing a new category.
Mhm.
But other people around me, A, didn't realize that they needed the category, like buyers,
Yeah,
and B, consumers didn't know either because it wasn't there. And
yeah,
so I think that that's the challenge with people around you, is that they love you and they, you know, want to give you advice, and maybe they'll sort of share their own doubts about why you shouldn't do something. But for me, I felt that it was a time that I kind of needed also to learn. And I was willing to risk that time and sort of these decisions. People used to also say to me, well, if it doesn't work, I mean, don't you kind of become less marketable for a job? And I thought, I don't know the answer to that.
yeah,
Right. But I do know that I did a really good job when I was in tech. And so maybe I'm going to go and try this. And then I tell people how crazy it was that I actually wanted to go and learn and try something. I mean, will that be held against me? I won't know for sure. And maybe some people will think that they don't want to hire me for that reason, but would I actually want to work for them either? And so that, anyway, that's something
you
that I
pointed
always,
to something, you just pointed to something in, because you talk about overcoming doubt and doubters. And
Mhm.
I think, people put these unforeseen doubts like, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? Who knows?
Totally.
We don't have a crystal ball about all of the things that may or may not happen. Nobody expected a pandemic to happen either. Well, some of them say they did expect it, but like we didn't know, right? And so
Yeah.
it's interesting because I think a lot of people would stop there and go, oh yeah, you're right, maybe I shouldn't go ahead with this idea, and they get stuck right there at that doubt. And so
Yeah.
you're someone who has developed a muscle for not allowing those doubts to kind of get on you and stick on you and stop you. Can you say a little more about it?
Well, I think
'Cause I
the
doubt it
the
was easy.
more you put yourself into uncomfortable situations, and that can be personally, that can be, in business, the more you get comfortable with automatically going back to places where you were uncomfortable and you succeeded.
Yeah.
And so it really, you talk about it as a muscle. I think it is a muscle, but it's also one where you trust yourself more. And I think that that's the problem, that we don't actually put ourselves into positions to actually, call it, take chances, be riskier, whatever. I think it's often those times where you felt a little uncomfortable, you felt a little scared, where you grow and you trust yourself, and you become more confident as well. And so I think that that is something that I've just, learned along the way. But coupled with that, I think that you also need to look back on things that, while you took these, risks, and while you put yourself into situations where maybe you didn't really know, you're going to make mistakes along the way.
Mhm.
And I think looking at those mistakes and taking those experiences to the next time, when, maybe you see something that comes up. Just as an example, during 2020, during the pandemic for us, I mean, we looked at our growth. It was an interesting time for us in March, when the US was shutting down. We're an essential product. While I knew what the Webster's dictionary definition of essential product was, we learned that we have to actually have enough water for the country, and our factories need to be moving, and all of those things, and we need to do what we can to merchandise shelves and keep business going. Well, with that, I think we knew that we needed capital, right? We didn't want to run out of cash while we were just, moving as quickly as we could. We had seen in 2008 and 2009,
Yeah.
during the financial crisis, that we were cutting it really close, and we had to, go out and make decisions. And so that was the first thing that we did when we were shutting down offices. We have two offices, one in New York and one in San Francisco, but we raised money. I remember, while people are trying to decide whether or not, they're going to shut down their offices, whether they're going to furlough people, I'm saying, "Oh, I'm busy raising money." They're like, "What? What are you doing?" And I said, "No, we're going to be ready. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. Makes me incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, I've never raised money on Zoom before, but I'm doing it." And we did it. And again, but that came from a time when we made mistakes. We waited too long. I think that with that, I'm even thankful for that experience, because I learned so much, that in this time I did it right.
Yeah.
Right? I did it in a way that was a lot less stressful. And by the way, we didn't furlough anybody. We kept everybody working. But we weren't going to get in a situation that we had seen ourselves in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, and I love that you pointed out, because often people will have those situations like what happened in 2008 and 2009, and it was tight and it was scary and it was incredibly stressful. And are you going to make it? Can you make payroll? Are you, like, what is the risks, right? Like, so
Mhm.
many entrepreneurs go through that, but you took those lessons, and instead of, you know, being so fearful, you're like, no, we're going to change this one this way, and raising capital on Zoom, because we're relationship people. We've been, we normally have to go sit down and create a relationship before we ask for the money. Now that's even changed, where I'm doing pitches for our clients and working with our clients on how they're raising capital as well. So it's a good point. There is no right answer. There's no
Mhm.
one way to do anything. And that's what I
Yeah.
think we've learned about the pandemic. But you point so well in your book, in Undaunted, where there isn't one right way. There's just the learning and the leaning into, that didn't work. Okay, what's next? Well, that didn't work. What's next? And, that's a constitution. Like, you have to really be brave enough to lean into it, but it's also a challenge, right? And
Totally.
you make it seem so effortless, but tell us a little bit about, where isn't it effortless for you? Like, where are some of those things that might be a bit more tough?
Well, I think everything. I mean, I try and insert this into kind of my daily habits where there are things that I don't really know how to do. And I think even you had mentioned my podcast. I mean, I started podcasting 3 years ago because I kept hearing about this thing called podcast. And I wasn't even sure, frankly, showing my technology stupidity back then, that I didn't know exactly how do you get onto a podcast. I mean, that was me totally. And I think that was something that I purposely insert stuff in to really try and understand things. I mean, 2 months ago, I kept hearing about TikTok and TikTok, and I thought, I'm not going to be the person that's gonna say that's, somebody else's business. I mean, instead, I'm not sure I'm gonna live my life
On
on
TikTok.
podcasts or in TikToks, but I want to understand it enough to be able to speak to it. And I think that is something that I think about a lot, that anything that I fear, I consciously make, and again, maybe you're not afraid, where you're going to call your local police department, but you're not going to insert yourself into it because you just think, oh, I don't know. I don't know how to write a business plan. I don't know how to run hint water on the machines. Instead, allow your curiosity and know that maybe there's going to be other people eventually who maybe really enjoy running hint water on the factory, in the factory, or maybe they are smarter than you at that, whatever, however you want to define it. But you should understand those things, and actually saying to yourself that that's someone else's job or that's someone else's business. As I've always said to my kids, that I may not clean toilets on a daily basis, but I actually know how to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you do not understand how to do it, which frankly is a problem for women for years, right? It's like, I mean, we've all talked about that. And understand it. It doesn't mean that you have to do it every single day. And I think that is something so important, and what everybody needs to hear, not just entrepreneurs, but, you know, women, men, kids. I mean, it's something that you should allow your curiosity to max out.
Yeah.
And that's what makes you, I think, a happier person too, because I can now say, I know so much about podcasting, it's almost scary. I know a lot about, raising money and launching a company, and I can run this product on plants, and I can talk plastics with you and things that you wouldn't necessarily think, I would know. I know what the process is of producing a off-Broadway play as well, right? Like there's just things like that I think just make you more interesting, more enjoyable, and enjoy life and being human.
Yeah. I I mean, I love this because we're so aligned in all of those thoughts, like that natural curiosity. And in my daily habits, one of my rituals is, what am I learning today?
Mhm.
And I also retired when we had our third child. I sold my company back to my business partners as I was a consultant traveling all over the world. And when we had our third child, I said, that's it, I'm out. And in doing that, like really focusing on the three kids, there was always this natural, like, well, what's next? And curiosity about learning things and creating things. And it was this shift from, you know, what's next was always, it's always going to be there. Like, what am I up for? What haven't I done yet that I can try, that I can either joyously fail at and lean into, or succeed wildly? Who knows what's available? So,
Totally.
and so I think that's really important because we're so focused on what if all the bad stuff happens? We don't focus on, well, what if you do something really extraordinary, like change the way people's habits are and drink water? Stop drinking sugary drinks. Like there's a huge obesity problem in North America, in Canada. There's just so many challenges that come with it, and you've shifted the paradigm.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the other piece that I touched on earlier is that for me, these diet sweeteners were causing huge challenges. I remember talking to a friend of mine who was my roommate in college, and she worked at the Center for Disease Control, and she still works at the Center for Disease Control. And she was sharing with me that they had this new division on type 2 diabetes, and how 2% of the population in the US 15 years ago had type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. And they felt that it was an incredibly fast growing disease, and one that seems to be earmarked by people who typically are exercising. They weren't born with type 2 diabetes, but they were also hooked on these diet sweeteners and these diet drinks and often low fat food. And I remember that was kind of my first moment where I even went back to my doctor and I said, you know, there's a lot of things that she's shared with me that are very very much in sync with some of my issues. And do you think I have type 2 diabetes? And doctors back then were saying, no, you don't. There's no way you do. And I think I was something that's called pre type 2 diabetes. Today in the US, by the way, 45% of the population has type 2 diabetes or
I was going to say it's a
pre-diabetes.
lot higher than 2%.
It's a lot higher.
Been
Yeah.
over the 35% threshold for quite some time.
Yeah, and so that's the thing I think that I've really realized is that sometimes people won't understand what you're talking about and don't read the same stuff, don't sort of have the same journey. They don't have a friend at the Center for Disease Control where you start to hear this stuff. And and I think that that was the thing that I really realized was it was kind of, different. While you're going to have your own doubts about whether or not you can do something, you can have the doubters as well. But it sometimes I feel that when you're getting this messaging, it's your gift to actually go and do something about it, and your choice. You don't have to
Yeah.
either. I mean, that's the thing. I remember, I haven't even talked about this, but I remember when I was in high school that I did a paper on Diet Coke. And I loved my Diet Coke. I had been drinking it for a few years. And what I found was interesting, I grew up in Arizona and Phoenix, and at times in the summer it'd be 120 degrees. And there were times when I remember going to Safeway and all of the Diet Coke was pulled off the shelf. And there would be a sign that said, no more Diet Coke. And I was always like, oh, what happened to the Diet Coke? And then I remember somebody sharing with me who was working at Safeway, telling me that sometimes the soda actually hardens by the heat.
Crystallizes.
And I thought, and it crystallizes. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. And so I started looking at, is it phenylalanine or
Yeah.
I think that's,
Phenolphthalein, something like
yeah.
that. PHA.
And even still, like, I mean, I was gifted with kind of this moment, right? That I should have been more aware of it. And I wrote a whole paper.
Already in the cans, what's it doing in your arteries?
Totally. But I didn't make that connection back then. I had to go, move to New York and be in journalism and go and work in tech and whatever. And then I came back to it. But I think that point was so instrumental to me to really, another point along the way in the journey where I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to do anything about it. And I certainly wasn't ready to stop because I was addicted to it. But I think that there's things like that happen to you along the way. People often say to me, oh, I wasted my time. No, you didn't. You didn't waste your time. It's your journey, and you have to believe that. But now try and figure out what you do going forward that you really care about and that you're passionate about.
And you said something, you talk about your Diet Coke addiction, and there are so many substances that we're addicted to. I'm addicted to caffeine. I fully admit it. And I have no intention of doing anything about my caffeine addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so until it starts to cost me something, well, yesterday, for instance, and my doctor's kind of been on my case about this. This is full transparency in this conversation. My doctor's been on my case. And I had an episode of tachycardia yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it immediately, the whole body, like the heart rate. And I wear an Aura ring, and I just checked my heart rate, and I was like, oh yeah, your resting heart rate right now is 125. So this morning I really watched. It's like, no, on the caffeine, because I didn't even realize how many coffees I had drank. you're home. You're just going and getting, and I have an, Nespresso. So it's like all zhuzhy and stuff. So I think my
And you
cappuccino,
probably like the
right?
taste
I
and
love
all.
the taste. I love the experience. And, but it's like until something happens, then we don't intervene in it. And for
Totally.
you, it was, like you couldn't get the weight off and you're feeling like you're tired and your skin. And I've had all of those things myself as well, right? We have those things along the way. So I think it's really important when we're paying attention and becoming what I would call consciously aware of the impact and the cost of those choices.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. I think it's so critical. And, but also knowing that if you're not ready to go do something about it too, that's all right as well. People always say, well, do you have to go start a company? No. I mean, if you know another company out there that is doing something that you're interested in, or maybe you see a leader that you really want to, you admire and you really want to go learn from, I mean, go write them a letter and share that you're super interested in entrepreneurism. You haven't been an entrepreneur, maybe you want to learn some things, because I think that that's another thing that I always share with people as well, frankly, not just because I'm a founder, but because I'm still the CEO 15 years later, that having that experience of working in large companies, also working for scrappy startups of 5 people, but also being in a hockey stick situation and watching it scale, I know a lot more about culture. I know a lot about different stages. And I think that having that experience, that was my journey. And really made me that much more capable to frankly remain CEO and stay in my company, because that's something also that a lot of entrepreneurs don't are not able to do.
Yeah.
And also, finding the right partners. I mean, that's another thing that I've seen a lot of people miss on, and thinking that they can go it alone. And it's really tough. And I think having those experiences, understanding really what's important, and especially when you're in a situation versus actually reading about it,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to absorb for so many people.
In your partnerships, like a lot of people ask me, how do I find the right partner? And how do I know that? Often partnerships fail more often than they succeed.
Mhm.
And, one, you partnered with your husband, which is also very challenging to do. Family run businesses, were there periods in your marriage where all you were talking about was Hint and the company? And if you're not talking about the kids, you're talking about the water. So were there things
Yeah.
like that? But tell us a little bit more about your experiences with partnerships and what you would say to yourself now in that.
Yeah, it's so funny. I just finished an article that I'm publishing next week on this whole topic. But it's interesting because I wouldn't say that. I definitely think that you need a partner, because some days you need somebody to, not only from a skills standpoint, have somebody that balances you, but somebody also, especially if you're launching something that is a brand new category, that can be supportive. And I didn't intend on starting a business with my husband. I think my husband, the only reason I even shared that I was doing this company was because we have a joint bank account, and I was taking $50,000 out of my account. And that was when I think he felt sorry for me too, because I was pregnant with my fourth, and he's like thinking, oh my God, is she losing her mind? I mean, we've all been there, right? With our family or spouses. And that's when, he really realized that he could be useful. I mean, he's an intellectual property attorney. So I asked him to take on a task of making sure that everything was registered around my name and the Hint name and all of that. But in addition, he just had ideas when he saw that I was trying to do something, and he said, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? So what I found was that he really helped me to think about things. Sometimes he would solve the problem as well, but this was even before I was paying him or he had a job title. I mean, it was just kind of, talking about things. And he ended up taking the role of chief operating officer shortly after we had my son Justin, just because he thought everybody's asking me for a business card. He truly thought the chief operating officer on the business card was a joke. Like he wasn't sitting here saying, today I'm going to start. But then he's still the chief operating officer 15 years later. And what he found, even kind of about his own journey, he went to law school and became an attorney, but didn't love it. He wasn't passionate about it. And so when I started doing something, he asked me, he said, can I help you full time? Because I'm super interested in doing it. But again, to your point, it doesn't work for everybody. I think for us, we're very, very different people, very different skill sets. You've met my husband, Theo. And I think, and he feels the same about me, that we're yin and yang, and we appreciate what each other does in terms of, like, we think what each other does is hard.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think what I do around branding, around, innovation and creation is that, I mean, it is hard, but it's not, it comes to me more naturally.
Right.
And so that is the thing that I think is so critical. But are there days when, we're out on our hike in the morning that we're just talking about work? You bet. But we also love it. And it's our time to be able to speak about that. But I think that the other piece of it that I'll say that a lot of people don't talk about is that if you actually have your business and your family, then you have a lot less to divide on. So I see so often where you've got partners where, maybe you went to business school together and you are, really challenged. And then, by the way, one goes and gets married or has kids or both. And then suddenly the other one is sort of feeling like they're doing more. And that's where the divides really come, that are not obvious to people, right? And one ends up stepping down, one wants to do things. Again, they both had different journeys, but they haven't sort of come together other than their business. It can work, but it often has problems along the way too.
And I love that you said that, because you and Theo are the yin and the yang. Like, and it's funny because my husband, you've met my husband as well. And
Yeah.
Carl and I are very similar. Like, he's more like Theo in terms of the analytic, and I'm like that driver, that driving force. When you think about what is next for where you guys are going and where you're taking, like, you've created new lines, new sunscreen, right? Where did here it is. I love this, by the way. My little
hand sanitizers. Yeah, they're hand so sanitizers.
Good. And I really have to say, I feel like one of the cool kids now. I was so envious. I was like, oh, where did Kara get that cool mask on social media? And when you sent this to me, I was so happy. I love.
And they're great fabric too, and they wash really well. And they're
awesome. And my lipstick comes out of it. So, because I need to figure out how to make a mask-proof lipstick where it's not all over my face after I take the mask off.
So true. Well, these are really great. They're breathable, and we sell them on our site.
Do you? Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Where can people get those? Because people will want the Hint mask, because it's like, just, it is really a light and amazing mask. I love that. But you're creative in everything that you're doing. When I look at the products that you create, between the sunscreen and the sanitizer, it's aligned with what your core purpose is. It's got
health.
Quality control. It's all about health. So what do you think, coming through this pandemic, what do you think is next? Now, you authored a book, which I think you're crazy, by the way, because I've been struggling for 3 years with mine. It's still not done. It's killing me. But, the book in and of itself, but what is your vision now? Like, has it changed? Has it shifted? What are your thoughts?
I think it's becoming more and more focused on the consumer and trying to help them solve health issues. So a few years ago, you touched on this, the sunscreen. We did a deodorant. Again, hand sanitizers. We did some masks as well, initially for our team. And then we realized, as people kept asking us for the masks, because they were just so great. And, but As we have over 50% of our business is direct to consumer on from drinkhint.com. We also sell on Amazon too, but we really have seen that the consumer is relying more and more on us and other brands that they believe gets them and really understands them. And so that for us is the focus going forward. And I mean, I've never seen anything, frankly, like it. How many people write to us and ask, what's your next product? And they don't expect us necessarily. A lot of them want more flavors. I mean, that's like the number one thing that people share with us, but people are just excited about us trying to solve problems
Mhm.
around sunscreen and taking certain ingredients out because we've done the research. And me personally too, from an innovation standpoint, a lot of CEOs are not involved in innovation. I've actually chosen to stay involved in innovation because I really want to, it's my own creativity and my own desire to learn, that I want to learn about how these are made. And I want to make sure that they're made properly and that I really can speak to it as well and be proud of it. And I think that that is something, that is a little bit different as well, that I'm not paving maybe the same path that every single CEO has. And I think that that's important, that it's also possible to know that.
I think that's part of your success formula, right? I think the uniqueness of you and what you bring is part of your purpose and your success formula. And it's so, I love it. And I'm so energized by the conversation with you. And we could keep talking. We could probably do a 21, week marathon on all of the chapters that you have in here and unravel so many different things. But in just where are people finding, I got my copy and I've been gifting some people copies of Undaunted. When you go into the link,
Thank you.
you're going to get a link. And for those of you who are watching the podcast, you'll be able to download a gifted copy from CoachC to be able to get the downloadable or purchase it on Amazon. It's a really incredible story, but I love the message of being undaunted. And right now, more than ever, I think people need that. We have so
I
many
totally agree.
mental health challenges for people right now. How, like, just that message in and of itself is, and being undaunted together. It's not a go it alone thing.
I totally agree. And I think it is about not making things so big that you can't actually go, right? That knowing that you can go out and try, knowing that you don't have to have experience, knowing something that I learned in tech a long time ago and heard often was no idea is crazy and ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's what I think about when I think about being undaunted too, that if we remember those things every single day, then we can find what we're looking for and what we want to get up and do every single day and what we're proud of and what we want, frankly, our families to learn and as well about resilience and about creativity and about just going out and doing it. And even if it's not a popular idea or you can change industries right in the middle. I mean, that's something that so many people are surprised about. Yet me saying I wasn't that interested in tech anymore. It wasn't that I wasn't while I was there, but I think that it's an important thing for us to teach the next generation too, that it's there's a lot of hard work that goes into actually building a company and kind of living a successful life, but it's also doable.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been so amazing, and I'm really excited. So again, you'll be clicking the links for some of our listeners who'll be getting copies of Undaunted, and I highly recommend it if you're if you can get this. Water is a game changer, and I've been loving it for years. My daughter and I used to go to Starbucks and just stock up on water because that was the only place at certain points in Canada that you could get it.
Yay.
And so, but Whole Foods, direct to consumer, buy Hint, and just really pick up that book. And Thanks again, Kara. Just love hanging out with you. It's really so refreshing always.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And stop by on social and talk to me at Kara
Yeah, how do
Goldin.
people find you? Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, KaraGoldin. I'm all over every channel. So come
And
say
we'll be
hi.
putting those links in there too. So amazing.
Great. Thank you.